The mystery box that is the Winnipeg Jets' second line for this upcoming season could be very fun. Let's chat about what we might see out of Jonathan Taves on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets.
Your Locked On Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. Most of all, though, we just love and appreciate your support. Tonight's episode is episode 2 of a week-long series. We are doing this as I will be out of the country for a little bit, so wanted to make sure that you had some discussion material. And if you missed yesterday's episode, we talked about what to expect from the Jets' top line next season. Probably not super shocking. If you go back and check, I was generally pretty positive about most of that line, save for Gabriel Vilardi, but I do think we'll see some good results from that trio. This second line, though, is a lot harder to figure out. I've given my best guess as to what I think we're going to see. This is the current projected second line with Nyquist and Taves and Perfetti. We don't really know if this is actually going to hold, so take some of this with a little bit of a grain of salt. Let's just assume, though, that season long, we get this as our second line in, barring any surprises, any trades, maybe some changes in the health status of a couple of players. It's going to be a very interesting year. And in particular, the first guy that I'm sort of looking at and might be the easiest to project is Cole Perfetti. Now, Perfetti was a very interesting player this past season, posted a career high of 50 points, earned quite a bit more trust from Scott Arniel, not enough to put him in top 6 minute territory, still averaged about 15 minutes per game, but that was about a minute and a half more than the previous season, which is a considerable jump. Now, he still doesn't always play late in games. Arniel, I do think, has started to trust him with that a bit more, and overall, I think what we saw this past year with Cole in his first full 82-game season as a Jets player was a big step forward in a lot of the details plays. Obviously, the points production is great, but I think what really stands out about Cole is that he's such a smart guy. This is a player who doesn't have the fleetest of foot and edge work, but he makes up with it, his brain power, his positioning, his defensive acumen, his forechecking ability. The forechecking thing, I think, was the biggest thing that took a big step forward. It's been growing the past couple of years, but this year it really took flight, and he became just an absolute wrecking ball in the corners. Now, he's not a guy who's necessarily going to throw himself at players the way that maybe a Brandon Tanev does, but he is an absolute pest down low, and he'll actually fight for pucks a lot more than almost anyone else on the team. I saw him win more puck battles along the wall than you would actually see from guys like even Lowry. He has that sort of tenacity and coordination to keep an eye on the puck at all times, fish it out, and make sure that whether he has it or not, that it's the Jets that win that battle. So he's a really impressive player. I feel like his overall game has grown by leaps and bounds, and I think the points production coming up to the level that it has is really just a reflection of his continued growth. Now, when you really think about it, 50 points averaging 15 minutes a night is incredible production. He has really grown his overall performance portfolio, and his power play work has only gotten better. He's just really taken steps forward. I think where that kind of had some rough patches was in a couple of particular parts of the season. The first half was a little bit slower, and in the playoffs this year, I feel like there were some games where he was very, very noticeable, and some games where you didn't really see as much of the Cole Perfetti that we're accustomed to seeing. Against Dallas, he really wasn't as big of a factor as I would have liked, and that definitely showed in some of the declining ice time from the start of the series. So a little unfortunate. I would have liked to have seen him be more impactful and more noticeable, but maybe that is in part due to who he's playing with. He's with Namestnikov and Ehlers probably has the most offensive talent and speed on that line, and Namestnikov, look, Vlad tries really hard, but if we are dead honest about his performances 2C, we know that more of his work is defensive and not so much in the goal scoring department. So Perfetti this year, what I really want to see from him is more assertiveness. And I think he started to show it this past year. I would anticipate that he's going to hit the 60-point mark this year, though. I don't really feel like it's going to be that hard for him. And if he actually has a real center who's got offensive chops, whether it's, a great top end player or just somebody who can at least make great passes and shoot the puck efficiently, I think we're going to see Cole really benefit because he oftentimes made really good passes. And, Nemesnikov would be on the other end of those, and that's not really the situation that you're looking for. Vlad can sometimes capitalize, but for the most part, I think Perfetti was watching a lot of good chances kind of go to waste. And so I think this is where having more talented line mates could really do a world of good. The one caveat I do have with this is that you'll notice the other two line mates are Taves and Nyquist. Perfetti is not exactly a speedster. His line mates might be even slower. And so that could have a really big impact on just how much offensive production we're going to see out of the second line group. It's why I do think the Jets are still intent on maybe making some kind of trade. I don't think that this is the exact trio that we're going to see coming out of camp and preseason, but this is the current projected group. It's our best guess. And so I do feel like some of the offensive production for Perfetti may be a little bit capped, but having Taves down the middle is definitely a skill upgrade over what he's used to working with. Nyquist is definitely a step back, but at least down the middle, you have a guy who has at one point in his career been one of the best centers in the world. So hopefully Perfetti is able to take advantage of that. I don't think that it's going to be too hard for him to hit the 60-point mark. And now that he's likely to get power play one time, don't be shocked if he drops a big year. I do feel like he's only gotten better as the seasons have started to roll along, and Arniel is starting to trust him more and more. He's not quite as stingy with the ice time as Bones was. And even though sometimes Perfetti still gets benched late in games when they're defending leads, I do hope that that's a trend that starts to reverse as Perfetti gets older. So overall, I do think that there's some urgency to get Cole signed long-term. I know that his deal is starting to come up here for renewal pretty soon, but I think you want to have that contract extension in place. This kid is going to be expensive. I do feel like he's, continuing to grow leaps and bounds every season. And this year, I'm anticipating him having his best season yet. I think the confidence is there. I think the skill is there. Now it's just finding a level of consistency and making sure that he can fight every single shift the way that we know he can. We've already seen the effort there. I just think it's, now the question of who are you playing with and how can you make the most of the line mates that you're given. Perfetti can't always turn, moldy lemons into lemonade, but I do think that the trio he's about to work with is hopefully a little bit more efficient at getting pucks on goal than maybe having Nemesnikov at center was. So Perfetti, I'm expecting a big season. Would love to hear your thoughts about him. He's probably one of my favorite draft picks the Jets have brought in. I have a lot of high hopes for him this season, and I think he's a guy that has only started to really reward my faith in him, but perhaps in ways that even I didn't expect. That forechecking ability and the defensive work, it is top notch. So glad to see him really improving that. He's become such a versatile player, and I do wonder if at some point, if he continues to play the way that he does, if he eventually gets a look at center again. He's a little smaller for most centers, and, he's not the fastest, which I do think does put him in a category behind what you'd normally ask for in a center. But if you're looking at skills and ways that players create down the middle, he's kind of an ideal fit with the way his mind works. So we'll have to keep an eye out for that. We'll have to see if they try that in camp. If not, at least we know that he's a great winger. Now, the guy who I do think will be centering him, at least for part of the season, should he be healthy, is perhaps one of the most hard to figure out players and biggest question marks for the Jets coming into the season. Will Jonathan Taves be the guy that the Jets really want at 2C? Let's chat about that. Ever wish managing your money felt easier? With Monarch Money, it can be. Whether you're growing your savings or planning a big purchase, Monarch puts you in the driver's seat. It's like having your own personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money is more than just a budgeting app, though. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So you're not just managing your money, you'll actually start to build wealth. Maybe you have a bunch of subscriptions that you don't realize you're spending extra money on. You don't need all of them, right? Monarch Money can help you identify where you're spending and wasting money, where you can cut back, and it can even help you set goals so that you meet your financial goals and desires a lot faster. And if you've got a partner or spouse, they have shared account apps, so account features, so you can always be on the same page. You can set goals together. You can track your finances and spending in one place rather than multiple apps, and you can always stay on the same page. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNHL for half off your first year. Hey friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us in tonight's episode as we are chatting a little bit about season expectations for players this coming season. Obviously, this year is going to be a different one for the Jets. I kind of feel like Winnipeg has sort of prepared us to expect something of a downturn a little bit. They've signed a lot of short-term deals for a lot of depth guys with their UFA money, and they haven't made a big acquisition just yet. Not that they won't, but I do kind of feel like based on the fact that everyone's going to be buying, I sort of feel like the Jets are going to be priced out and not feel comfortable making big splashes. Their biggest splash has likely been Jonathan Taves, though. He is, I think, their marquee signing of the offseason, and I think he's the guy that they're going to try and make their biggest acquisition of the year, at least until we start to see some big trades. And Taves is certainly the most high-profile free agent the Jets have ever signed. He is a multi-Stanley Cup winner, former captain of the Hawks, hometown hero, you name it, the dude has probably done some version of it, whether it's playing for Team Canada, captaining one of the top teams in the NHL. He has gone through just about every experience, and he's also played for like a ridiculously long time. That was until 22-23 when, he was dealing with some real serious issues. Eventually, he had long COVID impacts, and he took 2 years off to go and try and get some treatment for it overseas. He's back. He's ready to go. And the Jets have brought him in to be not just a center for the team and to increase the depth, but apparently they're 2C. The way that we're looking at him right now is that he is going to be the replacement for Lowry until Lowry comes back. And even then, the Jets are kind of positioning Taves to be their second line center. They know they need one. They are asking Taves to be it for now unless something pops up. And I feel like this whole plan kind of, for me, feels like the Jets aren't really seeing a young player out there that they're willing to spend for. And so Taves is sort of the stopgap option. And my own personal feeling about all this is that it's a really risky plan for a lot of reasons. You're asking a guy who hasn't played in 2 years and is coming off a very serious health complication to now be your second line center. I just don't know about that. If you want a more detailed look at what Taves was before he left the league, Garrett Hull on the 5-Hole Substack did a really deep dive into some of the underlying metrics, what was going right for Taves, what was going wrong, and kind of how he ended his career. And I think it's very interesting to note, his time in Chicago shows really well in the box scores, but if you dig deep into like the two-way stats, the defensive numbers, the offensive production, and the scoring chance creation, Taves was definitely not the same guy that he was in the final few years of his Hawks career. Not exactly surprising because he was getting into his mid-30s at that point. Now we have a guy who hasn't played in a couple of years, and quite frankly, Taves for me is a huge mystery box. If you ask me what he's going to do this year, I honestly could not tell you. My best guess and speculation is that we're probably going to see, I would say, tops like a 3C. I think it's going to take him some time to get up to speed and actually play at an NHL level. And once he does, I kind of feel like we're going to see more depth level production from him. Offensively, I think he's got the passing and shooting to definitely put up pretty decent numbers, but I don't know what his foot speed is like. And he has talked about the legs not really being there yet. So, I feel like you kind of have to start limiting his minutes at the start. And yet the Jets seem to want him to be the 2C. So I don't quite know how this is all going to work. Even in his time in Chicago, the last couple of years, he went from like 20 minutes a night down to 17 and a half, which I think is kind of a fair reflection of what was starting to happen to his game, age starting to catch up to him. And now, he hasn't played in a couple of years. He won't be in game shape for a while. And we really don't know what he's going to do in a Jets uniform. At the worst, I do think he'll be like a 4C. I just feel like the top 6 center talk might be a little challenging. If he does have a best case scenario, I think you're looking at a guy who can put up 50 to 60 points and maybe have at least a break-even impact in terms of shot chance creation and some of the defensive metrics. But again, I just don't know where his game is going to be. Everyone says, well, he'll know his body better than anyone else. And that's true. But he also has a motivation to sell himself as a guy who can still play. And we don't really know what that's actually going to translate to once he's in a game situation. The league continues to get faster and evolve. And Taves, he's played for well over like a decade and a half. This is not a guy who's just coming into the league and is a fresh-faced rookie. He's probably one of the oldest vets out there. We see guys like Marchand still playing, obviously, at a very high level. Burns has still been putting up pretty decent results. But these guys are more the exception. You don't really see many veterans. Even, Perry is definitely on the wrong side of 30, and I think that's starting to show. Marchand, I think, is probably the best example, but they are unicorns. There are very few players at this level of the game that are playing the way that these guys are and still positively contributing. So I would say, let's say, on the more modest end, Taves is probably going to be a 35 to 40 point guy, which for like a $2 million per season deal is pretty decent. Where I do have some questions is once his bonuses start kicking in, how that will all change, right? If they have him playing up to 60 games, do they think he's actually going to do that? Because that's where he'll start to look more like a $5 to $6 million player. And will he be putting up production that's worth that money? I don't know. The fact that they have this could suggest one of two things. Either they want to reward him and they do expect him to play a lot, or they really do feel like he's actually at risk of not playing more than like 30 or 40 games this season. And so they're sort of preparing some level of incentive structure in case he does hit those milestones. I think it's a very interesting question. I don't really know where he'll fit into this lineup immediately. Again, if they try to make him 2C, I think that there could be some changes pretty quickly around that. And really, I don't think that he's supposed to be the 2C for longer than it takes for Lowry to get up to full speed. I think Adam is probably their internal solution, but Taves, in the meantime, is going to have to carry a pretty big offensive burden for a guy who has not played in 2 years. And so he, for me, is a huge mystery box. If this gamble works out, it will be a very bargain price center deal, and it could be a great addition to the Jets. I just think it's one of those situations where when you look at it from a risk management perspective, there's a lot riding on Taves being good. And I just don't know where his game is. It wasn't looking great towards the end of his Hawks tenure, but like Chicago's a bad team. Like no one's surprised if you drop a minus 31 at the end of your career there because let's be real. Defensively, that team is a mess. The goaltending is a mess. Taves himself was, 34-ish at the time. I just don't know if we're really expecting a lot here. But if nothing else, the feel-good stories there, the comeback stories there, and we did see Landeskog come back from very serious lower body complications to now playing at a pretty elite level immediately once he got back to the Avs. Didn't last long just because Colorado got knocked out pretty quickly, but my guess is a full season of him will see Colorado feeling a lot stronger about their season and postseason prospects. So, Taves will be interesting. Can he help Perfetti really start to find, that offensive streak? Because Cole has kind of been looking for somebody to really play off of and improve. And Taves could certainly be not only a big mentor down the middle, but also just a really skilled outlet. Somebody that Perfetti can actually rely upon to put the puck in the back of the net. Jonathan at one point was clearly one of the best centers, if not the best center in the league at the time of his absolute prime. And now Perfetti maybe wants to follow down that same path. So if Jonathan can teach him some of the core aspects of playing down the middle, how to really do this game at this level, and, kind of smooth him into that role, maybe this could work out for the Jets' benefit for the long term. Winnipeg also has Braden Joerger waiting in the wings, and I'm sure Joerger would love to learn behind Taves. I think pretty much everyone would, and I think, Joerger really is Winnipeg's future 2C answer. Some folks have felt that I think WHL Ball felt like he's a little further off. I think you're wrong about that. I think Joerger is a lot closer than you think, and I think he's going to make the jump quickly, in part because his floor is already very high. Braden, the biggest question with him is really the ceiling, but in terms of his defensive responsibility, his two-way game, he's already at a pro level. He has that awareness and that skill. It's just the offensive side where I do wonder how that translates at the NHL level. But I do think he'll probably start to get some bottom 6 minutes here, at least sometime this season. Not in a very big sustained role, but rather than talking about him being a 3 to 4 year sort of player, expect him in the next 2 seasons. He'll have a cup of coffee at some point this year, and I think next year, like the following season, he might really start fighting for a roster spot. If he doesn't fight for one out of camp, I think the 26-27 season is where you really start to get excited about him as a full-time NHLer. But this year, he'll be in the mix, probably a late cut, but I do think he's a lot closer than people might be expecting. So, look, the Jets' future core, I think, is looking pretty bright. It's just we do have some pain to get through, and I think guys like Taves can kind of help the young kids get through this year of what could be a little bit of difficulty. I think the Jets will still probably make the playoffs, but having Taves to mentor and get you through this period could be invaluable to the experience level of the roster. So even if he maybe doesn't have the best year, I do think just having him on the team will be a big leadership role. Now, the last guy that is projected to play on this line is perhaps yet another mystery box, and that's Gustav Nyquist. Gus is a guy that I, for years, have been kind of a quiet admirer of. I feel like he's always been in that middle six rotation, very quietly one of the most underrated and effective wingers out there. But, he's in his late 30s now. We really don't know what his game is going to be like. And so we're kind of asking a lot of a guy who's going to have to step in and be the Ehlers replacement. He's not Nik, but he still can be a good player. Hey, friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us in tonight's episode as we're chatting a little bit about, the second line and really season-long expectations for not only this trio, but also other lines. Tomorrow and on Friday, we will have some thoughts on, the third and fourth lines and maybe some additional depth players out there that are kind of in the mix. But one of the guys that I'm really not sure what to think about is one of our most recent acquisitions for just over $3 million for this season. It's Gus Nyquist, and Gustav is a player that I always love as trade deadline bait. I think he has probably been one of the most traded players the past couple of seasons. This guy has bounced from like 4 or 5 different organizations. He had a really long tenure with the Detroit Red Wings where he was kind of playing towards the end of the great Datsuk era and everything. Nyquist, I think, has always been sort of, in some ways, underappreciated. In other ways, not really acknowledged at all. Nyquist, I don't feel like people know about him that much just because he tends to be very fringe second line minutes, more in that mushy middle, but he's very skilled, right? He's pretty consistently put up between 40 and 50 points for most of his career. He's been a solid chance creator, a good finisher, traditionally shooting at least 10 to 12%, somewhere in that range. And his two-way play, especially the creativity and sort of the pesky nature along the walls, he's been a very skilled middle six guy. I love his game, and I think he's a great creator around the slot and faceoff circles. The problem is he's now 35, and at this stage of his career, I just don't know what the Jets are going to get out of him. A couple of seasons ago, he had some rough stints with Columbus that didn't go super well. The first year in Columbus was decent. Second year, pretty good. Third year, yeah, started to see some declines. Then he moves to Minnesota, had a brief, decent run there, but then, things kind of got derailed towards the end, I think due to injury. Then he had a really big year in Nashville. He had a 75-point season the year before the season. So which version of Nyquist are the Jets getting, right? I tend to look at him as a guy who's probably going to put up like 40 points. I think my problem with Nyquist is that he's going to be very slow. And the Jets don't have a lot of transition speed right now. This second line, as arranged, assuming that you see something like Perfetti, Taves, and Nyquist to start the year, there's no foot speed there. Unless Taves is able to get his feet back very quickly, and even then he's probably not going to be the fastest, no one here is going to be a big puck carrier. Nyquist is probably going to have to do some of that transition work. Perfetti will, and none of these guys are like elite at it. Not these days, not with the way the NHL is moving. In the regular season, that's not going to really hurt you as much, but in the postseason, absolutely. It's why I don't really feel like this second line combination is going to be the exact one that we see at the start of the season. I would anticipate that there's at least one more acquisition somewhere to try and pad out this top 9, because as it's arranged right now, it is very slow and a little on the older side. Assuming everything goes really well for Nyquist, though, if he really does settle into Winnipeg and does a really good job, I would anticipate him being, for one thing, a big power play 2 contributor. You know, we're used to having guys like Iafallo and Nemestikov and stuff on this unit. Nyquist is a legitimately great upgrade there. I think on that second power play unit, he will actually do some real damage. I would not be shocked to see him put 10 to 15 points up on that unit. And I think at even strength, if you get 45 points out of him and he's not an absolute drag at 5v5, you're happy, right? You don't really care. You're not paying him a lot. He's going to be a guy that's probably flipped at the trade deadline. He's really just a stopgap until you find something better to replace Ehlers, right? We don't really have many options. Our best option's probably Brad Lambert, and Lambert might be a call-up later this year if the foot speed really is an issue for the team. But, you know, as WHO Ball also pointed out, you know, he thought I might have more faith in Lambert. And for me, I don't personally actually think he's going to be that great for the Jets. Not this year. I think you just kind of have to throw him in to find out, because at this point, like, you got to see if he can help the Jets, right? Winnipeg's kind of at a point where they don't really have a lot of luxury to wait for him. Either he starts to do well and really starts swimming, or he sinks. Nyquist is your temporary option, but not really somebody that you want to lean on for the whole season. I think in a third or fourth line role, Nyquist is great. But if you ask him to be this anchor in your top 6, I think he's going to be more anchor and less the effective goal scorer and creator that we've seen in previous years. So this is a really weird line combination to me. I don't think that it's going to fit perfectly the way that the Jets want, and I think it'll take time for at least Taves to get up to speed. Nyquist, I think, is going to be a victim of that, so I would anticipate 35 to 40 points from him this season. If you get more out of it, fantastic, but I wouldn't really be banking on much at even strength. I think a lot of his damage is probably going to be more on the power play, but curious to know how you feel about this. Do you feel like a Perfetti, Taves, Nyquist trio can actually work? I think Perfetti balances out their defensive deficiencies quite well, but I think offensively and speed-wise, I have some real concerns. Would love to get your perspective on this. Drop your thoughts and comments and predictions for the second line below. Let me know who you think could actually come in and fill these roles. Who would you rather see in this trio? And who do you think might actually get these minutes if they do make a change? Drop those thoughts below or at my social medias at HLLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. For tonight's episode, that's going to be all the time that we have. Tomorrow's episode, I want to dive into the third line. The third line has some really interesting roster battles that I think are probably going to go under the radar, and I want to chat about what's going to happen with Adam Lowry. Lowry might be the most important player on this team that hasn't been talked about at all, and yet he might be crucial to everything Winnipeg wants to do going forward. We'll chat about what his late arrival to the team might mean and how the Jets are going to have to figure out what to do with him if he's not feeling 100% on tomorrow's episode of Locked On Jets. But for tonight's show, again, that's all the time that we have. I thank you so much for listening and making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. We'll see you back here tomorrow. So as always, have a great night and go Jets go.